four-footed blitzkrieg, fast-moving, hard-hitting. The idea then was get the fastest means available of moving over varied terrain and build a fighting unit around that mobility. Times change, but today the idea is exactly the same. Only now the cavalry moves on the wind, and the saddle trooper has become the sky trooper. Air Mobile is the military word for such a unit, and the Army's first such combat division is now in being. The 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile. The new first team.
Around 350 BC, the Greek historian, soldier, and mercenary Xenophon writes perhaps some of the earliest works detailing the command of cavalry and the use and care of horses. Born in Athens, but identifying with Sparta for most of his life, Xenophon is a student of Socrates and spends a great deal of time fighting with mercenaries led by Cyrus against the Persians. His account of the battles, like the Battle of Cunaxa that saw Cyrus perish on the battlefield, and the journey home, forms the foundation of his history, Anabasis. Xenophon also went on to write a comprehensive, if not romantic, biography of Cyrus the Great himself, the Cyropedia. His work, the Hellenica, is a source many historians refer to as the most accurate account of the years in Greece from 411 to 362 BC, continuing the history begun by Thucydides in that author's History of the Peloponnesian War. One of few authors from his time period whose entire body of work was preserved intact, Xenophon's writing covers a number of topics and genres, including histories, biographies, Socratic dialogues and apologies, and most importantly, manuals for the hunter, soldier, and horseman. Xenophon draws on his experiences as a soldier and cavalryman in his work Hipparchus, or The Duties of a Cavalry Commander.
First of all, it is incumbent on you to offer sacrifice and to entreat the gods to grant you to think and say and do those things by which you may exercise your command most agreeably to them, and with the greatest pleasure and honor and benefit to yourself, your friends, and your country. When the gods are propitiated, you must prepare your cavalry, taking care that the number prescribed by law may be completed, and that the force previously enrolled may not be diminished. For unless new horsemen are added, the number will constantly grow less, as some must retire from old age, and some must fail from other causes. After the complement is made up, you must take care that the horses may be fed in such a way as to be able to endure exertion. For horses that are too weak for their work will be unable either to overtake an enemy or to retreat. You must make it an object of your attention, too, that they may be fit for service, for such as are unmanageable are an aid to the enemy rather than to their friends. Such as kick when they are mounted also must be set aside, for they often inflict more mischief on their own side than the enemy inflict. You must pay attention to their feet also, that they may be in a condition to be ridden even on rough ground, knowing that when they suffer from being ridden, they become useless. When you have your horses in proper condition, you must next exercise your men. In the first place, that they may be well able to vault on their horses, for by that means safety has been secured by many. And in the second, that they may be qualified to ride over every kind of ground, as the enemy will be at different times in different places. When they are able to sit firm, you must see that they exercise themselves as much as possible in throwing javelins on horseback, and that they qualify themselves to do everything that cavalry ought to do.
In that same year, 350 BC, Xenophon sets down his rules of horsemanship and essentials for the soldier on horseback in his short treatise on horsemanship.
I wish also to set down how the man who is to run the hazard of battle on horseback should be armed. To begin with the cuirass, this must always be made to fit the body, for if it fits well, the body supports its weight. But if it is very loose, the shoulders have to carry it all by themselves. As for too tight a cuirass, it is a straitjacket and not a piece of armor. For a helmet, the Boeotian is the best, in my opinion, since it most completely protects all the parts that are above the cuirass, without preventing you from seeing. Now, as the rider himself is in extreme danger if anything happens to his horse, the animal also should be armed with a frontlet, breastplate, and thigh pieces. The last serve at the same time to cover the thighs of the rider. For offensive, I recommend the saber rather than the sword. For the rider being aloft, a scimitar blow will be more in place than the thrust of a sword. Instead of a spear of scantling, which is weak and clumsy to carry, I am inclined to recommend 2 javelins made of cornel wood. A skillful person can throw one and then use the other in front, on the flank, or in the rear. They are also stronger than the spear and handier to carry.
Throughout the ages, many cultures make use of horses in warfare. Early nomadic Central Asian peoples utilized cavalry in constant conflict among the many other tribes in their area, most famously in the Mongol conquest over most of the Eurasian continent. Muslim warriors in North Africa, Asia, and Europe during the 7th and 8th centuries also make use of light cavalry in their campaigns throughout those regions. The Middle Ages saw European knights become the ultimate heavy cavalry, as armored men and their sometimes armored horses ride into battle, as England, France, Germany, Spain, and other countries fight over territory, and later as the Roman Catholic Church mounts the Crusades from about AD 1096 through 1291. Long after the Crusades, conflict over territory continues, as United States Cavalryman Lieutenant Colonel George T. Dennison writes in his 1868 book, Modern Cavalry, in which he gives a brief history of cavalry in 1500s Europe.
Prince Alexander of Parma, when in 1552 he wished to surprise the Duke of Alençon, mounted several companies of infantry on pack horses, and thus hastened towards the enemy. This was the first instance of the employment of that force, and shortly afterwards it became customary to mount large bodies of infantry in order to move them quickly upon the decisive points, until at length dragoons came to form a portion of every army. Now that firearms are so much more deadly than heretofore, so much the greater advantage will be derived from the employment of mounted men trained to fight on foot with these new weapons.
It would be the combined strength of firepower, manpower, and horsepower that would lead to victory for a country of rebels over 200 years later. During the late 3rd century AD, the Christian martyr St. George is born to Greek parents, whose Greek name was originally Georgios, or worker of the land. Both his father, Gerontios, and his mother, Polychronia, were of noble Christian families and raised their son with those beliefs. After the death of his parents, George applied to Emperor Diocletian for a position in the Roman army. Diocletian had known George's father, who had also been a soldier, and the emperor gladly welcomed the son of Gerontius into the ranks. Soon, George was a high-ranking officer, a part of Diocletian's imperial guard. In February of AD 303, Diocletian issues an edict demanding that all Christian soldiers be arrested. George objects, declaring himself a follower of Jesus Christ, and despite Diocletian's attempts to convert George, with offerings of land and gold, George continually refused. This left Diocletian no choice but to execute George for his refusal. George gives all his money to the poor and prepares himself for his torture and execution. Not long after his grueling punishment and his beheading, George's body was returned to Lydda in Palestine for his burial, and Christians began to spread word of his martyrdom. For his bravery in the face of persecution, George was named a saint in Catholic, Anglican, and Eastern and Oriental Orthodox churches. He is a patron saint in numerous countries, and his willingness to fight for what he believes in made him a perfect patron saint of the United States Cavalry. In addition to his martyrdom, St. George is also immortalized in a legend in which George does battle with a ferocious dragon and rescues a damsel in distress.
When the valiant knight perceived that his enemy was about to fly from him, he sprang fiercely, like an enraged lion, upon his prey, and boldly placed his sword across the mouth of the den. This act angered the monster, and she began to bray horribly, and turning about her speckled tail, armed with poisoned darts, she threatened to sting him. But he was not dismayed, and with his mighty arm he struck her a violent blow, which glanced from her head to her shoulder. It made her dizzy for a moment, and enkindled within her a tenfold rage. And gathering herself up into a posture for leaping, she sprang high, and winding her enormous tail about her, fell with fierce power upon the shield of our knight, whose body she instantaneously enfolded in her fearful instrument of mischief. God help the man thus wrapped in error's endless train.